I've always been fascinated by the unknown, by the things that lurk in the shadows and the stories whispered in hushed tones. But there was one experience, one terrifying encounter, that changed everything I thought I knew about the supernatural. This is the story of the Midnight Man, a presence so malevolent that even speaking of it now sends shivers down my spine. Now, if you see a ghost in the mirror, it's just trying to remind you to subscribe. Don't make it angry. Hit that like button too. But before we begin, sit comfortably, dim the lights, turn the volume up, and listen to what the world has to say. Now, let's begin. It all started when I moved into an old apartment building on the outskirts of the city. It was one of those places that seemed to exist in its own time, a relic from the past, with creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air like thick fog. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but I didn't think much of it. I was just excited to have my own place, a space where I could start fresh, away from the chaos of my previous life. The building's residents were an odd mix of reclusive old-timers and transient young people, but I kept to myself, content with my solitude. There was one thing in the apartment that caught my attention from the very first day: an old, ornate mirror hanging in the hallway. It was large, with a heavy wooden frame carved with intricate patterns that seemed almost alive in the dim light. The glass was slightly tarnished, giving it a distorted, dreamlike quality. I never really liked that mirror. There was something about it that made me uneasy, as if it was watching me, waiting for something. But I shrugged it off as paranoia. After all, it was just a mirror, an inanimate object, or so I thought. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was around midnight. I had just gotten into bed when I heard a faint tapping sound, like fingernails tapping against glass. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it, but as I lay there, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. I got up, following the sound to the hallway. It was coming from the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, staring at my reflection. The tapping stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. But then, as I watched, my reflection began to change. It started subtly at first, a shift in the light, a flicker of movement that I couldn't quite place. But then I saw it, behind me, in the reflection, a shadowy figure, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a result of my overactive imagination. But the Midnight Man, as I started to call him, wasn't done with me. Each night he grew bolder, appearing in the mirror at midnight like clockwork. Sometimes He would just stand there, staring at me with those dead eyes. Other times, he would move, reaching out as if trying to pull me into the mirror with him. I began to dread the nights, staying awake as long as I could to avoid the midnight hour. But no matter how hard I tried, sleep would eventually claim me, and I would wake up to that same tapping sound, knowing that he was there, waiting for me. Desperate for answers, I started researching the history of the building, hoping to find some explanation for the Midnight Man. What I discovered was a story that chilled me to the bone. Decades ago, a man had lived in my apartment, a recluse who was obsessed with mirrors. He believed that mirrors were a gateway to other worlds, and he conducted dark rituals in an attempt to summon something from beyond the veil. The man had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind nothing but his mirror collection. The police found strange symbols carved into the walls, and the mirror in the hallway was the only one that hadn't been shattered. I knew I had to get rid of that mirror, to break whatever curse it held. But when I tried to take it down, I found that it was bolted to the wall, almost as if it was a part of the building itself. I even tried covering it with a sheet, but the tapping would start again, more furious than ever, as if the Midnight Man was angry at being denied his audience. The final night, the night that drove me from the apartment for good, was the worst of all. I had stayed up late, reading about rituals to cleanse the haunted space. Midnight came and went, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But then the tapping started again, louder and more frantic than ever before. This time, when I looked into the mirror, the Midnight Man was no longer in the reflection. He was behind me. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, icy fingers digging into my skin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The room grew darker, the shadows closing in, and I could feel him pulling me towards the mirror, towards that cold, empty void. With every ounce of strength I had, I broke free and ran out of the apartment, never looking back. I left everything behind, including that cursed mirror. I never returned to that apartment. I moved far away, to a place where I hoped the Midnight Man wouldn't find me. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that faint tapping sound, and I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next poor soul to fall into his trap. So if you ever come across an old mirror in a place with a dark history, think twice before you take it home. Sometimes, some things are better left undisturbed, because you never know what might be watching you from the other side. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, you can always reach me on real@gameacademics.vip. Thank you everybody, and good night.